One pilot's stand, a crew's revolt, a leader's fall. Part 1. Turbulence at 30,000 feet. Chapter 1. Captain in the Shadows. The hum of jet engines roared softly in the background as First Officer Malcolm Brooks made his way through the crew terminal at JFK Airport. A tall, composed figure with a steady gaze and years of experience behind him, Malcolm had the kind of calm presence that passengers and flight crews trusted instantly. He wasn't just good at his job, he was exceptional. With over 4,200 hours of flight time under his belt, no major incidents in his record, and glowing peer reviews, Malcolm had earned the unofficial title of the Rock among his colleagues. Everyone knew that if Malcolm was on the flight deck, the skies were in good hands. Today, though, wasn't about another flight. It was about the promotion. Captain Miles Reeves, his current supervisor, had informed him 2 weeks earlier that a slot had opened up for lead flight captain, a coveted position overseeing long-haul operations and mentoring junior pilots. "Your name's come up, Malcolm," Reeves had said. "Frankly, you're the most qualified." It wasn't just professional advancement, it was validation, leadership, legacy. And for Malcolm, the first black pilot in his airline's New York-based fleet, it would be history. But something felt off that morning. When he entered the briefing room, the usual smiles and nods were replaced by hushed murmurs. A few crew members avoided his gaze. Others offered half-hearted greetings. Then he saw Captain Reeves. The man didn't meet his eyes. Instead, he cleared his throat and motioned Malcolm into his office. "Malcolm," he began, closing the door behind him, "there's been a change of plan. I don't know, Chapter 2. Not the right look." "You're saying I didn't get it?" Malcolm's voice was calm, but inside something cracked. He had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in his head, but none of those versions included rejection. Reeves shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It came from higher up. Regional execs reviewed all candidates. They decided to go with someone else." "Who?" Reeves paused. "Derek Landon." Malcolm blinked. Derek was a competent pilot, but younger, less experienced, and had only been flying international routes for a year. Malcolm had mentored him. "I don't understand," Malcolm said. "I meet every requirement, exceed most. What reason was I given?" Reeves hesitated. "They said you weren't quite the right fit for representing the fleet at a leadership level. That's all I was told." Malcolm stared at him. "Fit? Malcolm," Reeves started. "No," Malcolm said, his voice cool and even. "You mean image. You mean optics. You mean race." Reeves didn't respond. He didn't have to. Malcolm stood slowly. "I've earned that position. Everyone knows it." "I don't disagree," Reeves said quietly, but he also didn't fight it, and that silence said everything. Back in the pilot's lounge, Malcolm moved through the space like a ghost. Conversation stopped as he passed. Some nodded at him awkwardly. Others glanced away. It didn't take long for the rumor to spread. Malcolm had been passed over. And not because he wasn't good enough, because someone thought a black face didn't fit the image they wanted in their promotional flyers and executive meetings. That evening, Malcolm sat alone in the cockpit of a grounded aircraft, staring at the instrument panel. He had flown through storms, mechanical failures, and emergency landings, but nothing prepared him for the turbulence of being told he wasn't right to lead. That night, he called his sister, Lena. "They think I'm too black for the brochure," he said, trying to joke, but the pain in his voice was real. "They're not ready for a pilot who can fly and change the system," Lena replied. "But guess what? They don't get to decide your value. The people who fly with you every day already know." Malcolm exhaled. The fire inside him didn't go out. It just started burning hotter. Part 2. Rising Altitude. Chapter 3. The Whisper Network. It started with a whisper. 2 days after the announcement, Malcolm was preparing for an overseas flight to Munich when First Officer Priya D'Souza approached him quietly near the crew elevator. "I heard what happened," she said, voice low, eyes sharp. "It's garbage. You should have gotten that team lead role." Malcolm gave her a weary smile. "Appreciate that." She leaned in slightly. "You're not the only one who sees it. The whole long-haul crew is talking." By the time they reached the cockpit, the whispers had become a quiet storm. One of the flight attendants, Jonah, a veteran with 15 years of experience, offered Malcolm a knowing glance. "Captain Landon's good," he said, not looking up from his checklist. "But he's not you." Malcolm paused. "You think people are really noticing?" "Oh, they're noticing," Jonah said. "We all see how this airline works. But this time, it was too obvious." The next day, Malcolm received a text from Marcus Chang, another senior pilot he'd flown with often. "Coffee, Hangar 5 Lounge, 2 p.m. When he arrived, 4 other pilots were already there. Priya, Marcus, Anna Romanov, and Luis Delgado. All were respected, experienced, and visibly frustrated. "This isn't just about you," Anna said. "It's about what message they're sending. That no matter how good you are," Luis added, "you'll always be one step behind if you don't look the part." "They're not even hiding it anymore," Priya said. "This could have been your legacy flight team. You earned it." Malcolm listened quietly. He wasn't used to people standing up for him. For years, he'd been flying, grinding, staying out of the spotlight, hoping his record would speak louder than bias. But maybe silence had never really protected him. Chapter 4. Speaking Up, Quietly. 3 days later, an email showed up in Malcolm's inbox. Subject: Captain Candidate Feedback, Confidential Summary. It was an internal document. He was blind copied, likely by someone in operations who believed in him. The email outlined the selection process for the team lead position. While Malcolm's record had been ranked exceptional, the anonymous notes from execs read, "Too reserved for front-facing leadership. Doesn't project the brand image. Highly competent, but lacks the dynamic personality we're seeking. Churi." Malcolm nearly laughed out loud. Reserved meant he wasn't loud or brash. Doesn't project the brand image meant his skin didn't match their brochure. Highly competent was code for we know he's the best, but we're still not choosing him. It wasn't the first time he'd seen this language, but it was the first time he considered doing something about it. Later that night, Malcolm sat at his small apartment in Queens, laptop open, cursor blinking on a draft email to the airline's Diversity and Inclusion Office. He paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Once he hit send, there'd be no turning back. No more quiet compliance. No more, just keep flying and prove them wrong. He clicked send. Subject: Formal concern regarding discriminatory promotion process. Then he took a deep breath and waited for the skies to shift. Part 3, Turbulence Within. Chapter 5, The Pushback. The airline didn't respond right away. For 4 days, Malcolm heard nothing. Then on the 5th day, the turbulence began. He was reassigned from international long hauls to short domestic hops, Newark to Boston, Philly to Atlanta, temporary operational changes, according to the crew scheduling email. Malcolm had been with the airline long enough to recognize what it was, a demotion in disguise. That same day, he received a formal notice from HR requesting a meeting with the airline's internal counsel. The tone was polite, but the subtext was clear. Watch your step. The HR rep, someone Malcolm had barely spoken to in 6 years, opened the Zoom call with a bright corporate smile. "We're just looking into a few things," she said. "Not disciplinary, just standard inquiry." "Inquiry into what?" Malcolm asked. "Well, concerns have been raised that you're encouraging internal dissent and potentially misrepresenting company policy in your communications." Malcolm blinked. "You mean the email I sent about being passed over without valid reason?" She didn't answer directly, just smiled again. That evening, he called Lena. "They're trying to scare me." "They're trying to silence you," she corrected. "The question is, are you going to let them?" Malcolm didn't answer right away. Chapter 6. The Flight Crew That Fought Back. 2 mornings later, Malcolm walked into JFK Terminal 5 and was greeted with something he hadn't expected. Solidarity. Pinned to the bulletin board just outside the crew lounge was a photocopied letter. At the top, "To whom it may concern. We, the undersigned flight crew members of Atlantic Skies Airlines, formally express our concern about the recent team captain selection process, which appears to lack transparency, fairness, and inclusiveness." Below were 34 signatures: pilots, attendants, engineers. At the bottom was a line that made Malcolm pause. "Leadership should be earned by merit, not molded by bias." He looked up. And there was Priya, arms folded, eyes fierce. "More are signing every day," she said. Malcolm was stunned. "You did this?" "We did," said Marcus, stepping in beside her. "They think we don't notice what they do behind closed doors. But we do. And this time, we're not letting it slide." The document had already started circulating internally and online. An anonymous crew member had leaked it to a popular aviation blog. By noon, it had been shared over 20,000 times. "Let Malcolm lead" was trending on Twitter by evening. Passengers commented. Former employees came forward. Even flight students were reposting screenshots of Malcolm's record. And by the next day, something unprecedented happened. A group of senior captains, most of them white, released a joint statement. "We stand with Malcolm Brooks, not because he's a symbol, because he's the best of us." That night, Malcolm sat alone in his car, parked near the runway, watching the glow of departing aircraft. He wasn't just a pilot anymore. He was now the face of something much bigger. And this time, he wasn't flying solo. Part 4, Breaking the Ceiling. Chapter 7, The Investigation Begins. By the end of the week, the airline's executive board could no longer ignore the storm brewing in public view. Passenger boycotts were trending. A prominent pilot union had quietly sent a warning letter to corporate, citing potential legal exposure related to discriminatory promotion practices. Then came the real shift. The FAA's Aviation Ethics and Equity Division requested records from Atlantic Skies. And just like that, an independent investigation was launched. Malcolm received formal notice via certified mail. "You are listed as a primary subject and cooperating party in an ethics and equity inquiry surrounding promotional policies within Atlantic Skies Airlines. Your full cooperation is requested." A representative from the FAA called him directly. "We're not just looking into your case, Mr. Brooks," she said. "We've received similar complaints, smaller, less documented. But yours," it opened the door. Malcolm listened, his chest tight. For years he'd walked the line. Excellent but quiet, strong but cautious. Now he'd shattered the line, and the system behind it was being exposed, piece by piece. At HQ, the executive team was scrambling. Captain Reeves, now under pressure himself, requested a private meeting with Malcolm. They met in a small break room near Terminal D. The mood was tense. "I didn't think it would blow up like this," Reeves said, his tone more defensive than apologetic. "That's the problem," Malcolm replied. "You didn't think it would matter. But it does. To me, to all of us." Reeves leaned forward. "The board is panicking. There's talk of reversing the decision, letting you take over the long-haul team after all." Malcolm shook his head. "Too late for that kind of fix. This isn't just about a role anymore. It's about what kind of airline we are." Reeves looked stunned. For the first time, Malcolm had stopped asking for fairness. He was now demanding accountability. Chapter 8. The Letter That Changed Everything. 2 days later, Malcolm received an unexpected email from an anonymous internal address. Subject line, "You're not alone." Attached was a confidential memo dated 8 months prior. In it, a senior executive wrote, "While Malcolm Brooks' credentials are solid, marketing has expressed concern about putting a black pilot as the face of our leadership team. Our core demographic still prefers a more traditional image on materials." Malcolm read it 3 times. The language was coded, but clear. This wasn't just soft bias. It was calculated discrimination to preserve an outdated image of leadership, one that excluded people who looked like him. He forwarded the email directly to the FAA investigators, and within 24 hours it leaked. News outlets picked it up. Headlines ran, "Airline faces racial bias allegations after pilot promotion leak. Marketing over merit, black pilot denied role based on image. Ashlet Malcolm leads sparks national airline reckoning." Late that night, Malcolm's phone buzzed with a message from Priya. "They're calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Rumor is someone's stepping down." The next morning, the announcement came. Executive VP of Operations, Malcolm's highest blocker, resigned effective immediately. The memo had come from her desk. In the same breath, Atlantic Skies released a statement. "We are reviewing all promotion procedures to ensure equity and transparency moving forward. Effective immediately, new appointments will be handled through an external committee review process." And then came the final line. Captain Malcolm Brooks will be assuming the role of lead flight captain for the international fleet, effective next month. Malcolm sat in silence. He had fought the system and won, but more importantly, he cracked it open for everyone else. Part 5, Leading from the Front. Leading. Chapter 9, The New Captain. The first time Malcolm walked into the briefing room as lead flight captain, the entire crew stood and clapped. It wasn't formal, it wasn't planned, but it was earned. 36 pilots, attendants, mechanics, and flight ops staff greeted him with applause that carried more than respect. It carried vindication. Not just for Malcolm, but for every quiet voice that had ever gone unheard. As he stepped up to the podium to begin the team briefing, Malcolm paused and looked around the room. He cleared his throat, steady but warm. "I didn't come here today to make a speech. I came here to do the job I was always ready for." A soft chuckle ran through the room. "We're not just flying aircraft anymore. We're flying forward. And this team will set the standard for what real leadership looks like. Competence, character, and clarity. Let's get to work." No slogans, no theatrics. Just Malcolm, and that was more than enough. Later that week, he led his first long-haul route as team captain, New York to Tokyo. The flight went smoothly, but the emotion didn't hit until the wheels touched down at Narita. In the cockpit, First Officer Greg Simmons, one of the newer pilots, turned to him. "Sir, I just want you to know, flying under your command, it's what made me stay in this job. I almost left after what happened last year." Malcolm smiled softly. "Then let's make every flight count." When they disembarked, passengers stopped to thank the crew. Some even recognized Malcolm from the news coverage. A teenage black boy traveling with his father approached shyly. "Are you Captain Brooks?" Malcolm nodded. The boy lit up. "I want to fly jets one day too." "You will," Malcolm said, kneeling slightly to eye level. "And when you do, make sure no one tells you what a pilot should look like." Chapter 10. Changing the air weeks turned into months, and Malcolm's impact began to show beyond the cockpit. He didn't just manage routes and oversee training, he mentored. He met with cadets from underrepresented communities. He partnered with HR to help review blind recruitment initiatives. He even launched an internal pilot development program focused on merit, not appearance. But change wasn't always smooth. During one internal review meeting, a senior executive made a dismissive comment about the diversity wave being a passing trend. Malcolm leaned forward, calm but firm. "This isn't a wave, it's a course correction. And if you want this airline to keep flying, you better adjust heading." The room fell silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. The tide had turned, and Malcolm wasn't asking for permission anymore. He was setting direction. One afternoon, while waiting at the terminal, he received an invitation. "You are cordially invited to deliver the keynote at the North American Aviation Leadership Summit. The theme? New Altitudes, Redefining Leadership in the Skies." Malcolm exhaled deeply. He had once been told he wasn't the right image. Now he was the image, but on his terms. Part 6. Clear Skies Ahead. Chapter 11. The Summit. The conference hall at the North American Aviation Leadership Summit buzzed with quiet energy. Uniformed pilots, executives, trainers, and aviation journalists from across the country filled the seats. Banners fluttered above the stage. New Altitudes, Redefining Leadership in the Skies. Backstage, Malcolm Brooks adjusted his tie in the mirror. The same reflection that had once been deemed not quite the image was now about to speak to hundreds. The host leaned in. "You ready, Captain?" Malcolm smiled. "Always." He stepped out onto the stage under a spotlight that no longer felt intimidating. It felt earned. Applause swelled as he reached the podium. He looked across the room, faces young and old, many like his, many not, but all watching. He began. "A year ago, I stood on the outside of leadership, not because I lacked experience, not because I lacked ability, but because someone decided I didn't look like leadership. Let me tell you something about leadership. It's not a photo in a brochure. It's not a voice that matches a marketing reel. It's who shows up when the pressure's high and the sky is dark." He paused. The room was locked in. "I didn't fight to be a symbol. I fought because staying silent felt like crashing the plane and calling it a landing." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "And I didn't do it alone. I had co-pilots, my colleagues, my crew, the people who believed that integrity flies higher than image. He looked down for a moment, then back up. Leadership isn't granted, it's revealed. And I hope to spend the rest of my career revealing it in others, especially those who've been told they don't fit, because the sky belongs to all of us. The room erupted in applause, a standing ovation. Some wiped away tears. Even a few skeptical executives stood, quietly, reluctantly, but stood nonetheless. Chapter 12, The Legacy Lift. 2 weeks later, Malcolm returned to JFK. Nothing flashy awaited him, just another flight to prep. But this one felt different. As he walked to the gate, a young woman in a pilot trainee uniform rushed over. "Captain Brooks?" He turned. She looked nervous, hopeful. "I just wanted to say, I applied because of you. I saw your speech. I printed your words and taped them to my dorm wall." Malcolm smiled. "You'll make a fine pilot. I want to be like you." "No," he said gently. "You'll be better." They shared a handshake that felt like a torch being passed. That evening, as Malcolm sat in the cockpit watching the runway lights flicker on, his first officer turned to him. "Sir, you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't sent that first email?" Malcolm chuckled softly. "All the time. And I'd still be flying, but someone else would still be grounded." As the plane lifted off into the fading orange sky, Malcolm felt something settle deep inside him. Not just pride, not just peace, purpose. He had flown through storms, injustice, and silence. Now he soared with something more powerful than altitude: truth, legacy, and a sky finally wide enough for everyone. The end.